In other stories, the House of Representatives is pushing for a harmonized legislative framework to unify energy policies across Nigeria, particularly in the renewable sector. Chairman of the House Committee on Renewable Energy, Afam Ogene, urged state governments to adopt the recently unveiled National Integrated Electricity Policy, also known as NIEP. This is to fully leverage the provisions of the Electricity Act of 2023, which empowers states to issue licenses for all electricity-related activities. Speaking to newsmen in Abuja ahead of the upcoming first National Legislative Conference on Renewable Energy and Expo, Ogene says that the adoption of the policy will expand investment opportunity across the states.
Electricity Act 2023, signed into law in February 2024, permits states to issue licenses for all electricity activities, generation, transmission, distribution, encompassing lawmaking, regulation, and policy development across the entire power sector value chain. The new National Integrated Electricity Policy 2025 provides an even clearer framework that states need to adopt as they set in place their new electricity markets. It is expected that in doing so, renewables will form a large part of the emerging investment opportunities.
To discuss this development, I'm now joined by energy expert Nika Gule. Good to have you on the news tonight. Let's begin with what a unified energy law mean in real terms.
Good evening, and good evening to our viewers globally. Thank you very much for welcoming me on the news segment. So, a unified energy policy, by its own definition, means the harmonization of the different pieces of legislation that govern energy generation and supply in Nigeria. As at yet, we do not have a unified energy policy in Nigeria because currently we have different pieces of legislation. For instance, we have the Petroleum Industry Act, which was signed into law back in 2021. We have the Electricity Act, which was signed into law in 2023. So these are the two major energy legislation that we have in Nigeria. Of course, we have the Renewable Energy Master Plan. It's not a piece of legislation yet, it's a policy document. So a unified energy policy will entail bringing all of these legislations into a single legislation that governs the energy sector in Nigeria. And it's something that is still being discussed by the National Assembly, specifically the House of Representatives. And I believe that it is from this stakeholder engagement that if there is the green light, then they can take this forward in terms of proposing a bill that will go through the legislative efforts before it becomes law.
Nick, let's just assume that the work is to produce one law that encompasses the current challenges Nigeria faces in the energy sector. As an expert in this area, what would be some of the key provisions that should be included in the proposed law?
And so first and foremost, let me serve a caveat. And the caveat is that I don't even think Nigeria's problem now, as far as energy is concerned, is legislation. We have the legislation. The issue is the application of the legislation. How are we putting into practice the laws that we have? For instance, we have the Petroleum Industry Act. What are we doing as regards the Petroleum Industry Act to take care of the issues that we have in the petroleum sector. For instance, as we speak today, Nigeria is producing less than 2 million barrels of crude oil per day. And we have reserves. Very recently, the Nigeria Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission said that we have nearly 38 billion barrels of crude oil in the ground. And if you have such a huge reserve in the ground, how are we applying the Petroleum Industry Act to enable the extraction of this crude oil? For instance, we can be extracting this crude oil at 5 million barrels per day. It's going to change the fortunes of Nigeria. What are we using the Petroleum Industry Act to deal with the midstream, the refineries that we have? What are we doing to deal with the pipelines that we have? What are we doing with that law to deal with downstream in terms of marketing and distribution of petroleum products in Nigeria? If only our policy handlers are able to deal with that, then we can even have the confidence that if they now have a unified law, it will facilitate the work that they are doing. Because currently, I cannot see how, for instance, we have an electricity act, but yet we are still doing 5,000 megawatts of electricity. So how would a unified energy act will not change the game? So I would say, as much as the advantages for a unified energy law are there, the National Assembly, who have oversight function over the different ministries, departments, and agencies of government that are responsible for the energy sector in Nigeria, should get on with their oversight function, should be asking the relevant questions. Why is Nigeria 200 million people on 5,000 megawatts when Qatar is got 3 million people and is on 8,000 megawatts? Look, 3 million people is just like the population of Lagos, Ireland. And they are on 8,000 megawatts, which is more energy, almost double the electricity supply of Nigeria as a country of 200 million people. So this is actually what should be the focus. Let us at least see the laws that we have now being operated before we talk about bringing in new laws.
What are your thoughts on this meeting that the House of Assembly is anticipating? The idea is to bring stakeholders that will speak to the challenges and look for, a holistic legislative framework. If you were to be at that or part of the organizing of that conference, what would be the focus for you? Because I understand a little of what you're saying to be that we do not need laws, but the implementation of what is already on the ground and oversight functions. But for this conference that's already being convened, what would be on the agenda if you were to lead?
Yeah, so first of all, when the Petroleum Industry Act was undergoing legislation, was going through the legislative process, I offered on several occasions that we are behind the times. Instead of trying to promulgate a Petroleum Industry Act, we should have been looking at an Energy Industry Act. Because the Energy Industry Act, therefore, will encompass both the fossil fuels energy we have now and the renewable energy, because the world is moving into renewable energy. So if I were to, like you said, put in my input in this conference, this is the first thing I'm going to say, that we should begin to take the laws that we have, like the Petroleum Industry Act, to transform it into an Energy Industry Act. What I would suggest that in order not to put too much into one law, we should separate the electricity law from the fossil fuels. But as it stands today, we have the Petroleum Industry Act dealing with the fossil fuels, while we have the Electricity Act dealing with non-renewable energy sources. So we just need to combine the Electricity Act in terms of all of the sources for electricity. And all of the sources for electricity include the fossil fuel, which is generation with gas, and renewable sources, which is generation with water, with the sunlight, that is solar, with the wind, and with biofuels. So that, we know what happens in Nigeria. You put too much on one person, and we don't end up getting results. And that is the reason why Electricity Act has now devolved from the federal government to the state and local government and even the private sector, so that they too can come in. We talk about things like state police. Why? Because we put all the police on one person, the inspector general, and if he's not effective, then the whole thing is down. So this is why, for me, in as much as I will be advising that the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act, should be switched to Energy Industry Act, I will be very worried that we don't put too much on one agency or department or government or ministry, so that we don't put all our eggs in one basket.
All right, Nick, thank you so much for your time and the insights provided.
Thank you very much, and good evening.